Drums of War, Chapter 25. The Third Fleet. Aboard the Trafalgar, Admiral Amelia the Saw Ross glared at her little brother, who didn't even have the good sense to join the Navy. General Adam the Hammer Ross just had to be the black sheep, the little twerp, as she thought of him despite his 60 years. Even adhered to his silly army tradition of refusing to call their ships ships. Absolutely insufferable. Even more insufferable, he was trying to muscle in on General Michelangelo's turf, namely extracting the Latreille prisoners. That was clearly a beachhead op, and therefore an R&I responsibility. "I understand that you have men on the ground," General Ross was saying as he pointed to one of the torture and indoctrination facilities on one of the 16 worlds slated for invasion. "But we should have contingencies. A prison and a fortress can be exchanged one for another with little effort, and there's a chance that the escapees might fail in some locations." General Angelo gripped one of the chair legs with a foot, maybe as a means to restrain himself, maybe because the meeting was dragging on, and said, "The rescues will not fail, unless you think the ADR somehow stopped being elite troopers." "Far from it," General Ross said, as he looked through the hologram at his colleague. "It's just a matter of chance. With so many rolls of the dice, we're bound to come up snake eyes at least once." General Angelo grunted. "I think if a rescue attempt fails, it'll more likely result in the enemy digging in at these prison facilities to deny us the rescue, and possibly use the Latreille as hostages." "And you expect to ride your dropships down into their fortified positions?" Admiral Ross scoffed. "And you expect to ride your dropships down into their fortified positions?" Admiral Ross scoffed. "We'll ride our void-capable transport vehicles to residential areas like this one here," General Ross said, as he zoomed in on the location, "and make use of these conveniently flat rooftops. ADR reports say that they're full up of the laborer slaves, and are completely disarmed. We'll be able to establish an FOB for the rescue with little resistance, while the main force lands where R&I establishes our beachhead." "Not terrible," Admiral Ross admitted, "but that's assuming that the enemy doesn't fortify their approach. R&I can peel off a platoon or two for support. We can organize something with anti-material squads," General Angelo stated. "As to your temp FOB, I think it's a bad idea. I don't think the Exarch nobles would blink at shutting their slave residence, and that your FOB and EP wiped out in a big pile of rubble. Their weapons can't scratch. Their weapons can destroy their buildings, which you're proposing to build on top of, little brother." Very satisfyingly, the general bristled under the reminder of his relative age, but he looked at General Angelo and said, "Good point. Suggestions?" "Insert at the buildings like you originally planned, but extract at the beachhead FOB. R&I will have picked out a nice defensible location for you, and you'll be moving towards active friendlies." Admiral Ross zoomed in on an interstellar view and said, "Now let's talk about how we're getting your dirt pounders on the dirt. These 3 systems especially are important. The hyperspace sea has major currents running. You don't care, either of you. Okay. These 3 systems represent logistical node points. Taking them quickly will increase the speed of the invasion of the other worlds, and thus the rescue of the Latreille, as well as deny the enemy the most efficient path for transport. Total war is in effect, and intel says that not a single one of the prisoners are housed in any of the stations or orbital facilities in these systems. I'm cracking them. If the ADS says clear on the 5 worlds, I'm extracting them and glassing them." The words came out to her like orbital munitions from a battleship. "Glassing," General Angelo said with eyes closed and teeth bared. "I suppose it has to be done." "Can we take those worlds?" General Ross pleaded. "I can take and hold them, I swear." "Can you do it in less than 3 days?" General Ross wore an expression that suggested that his sister had snapped him. "No, I cannot." "Then, if there are no hostages on those worlds, they burn, and may God have mercy on my soul." There was silence in the conference room until she broke it again. "T-minus 11 hours, gentlemen. We still have work to do." Lieutenant Mascio Costa prayed the rosary. He especially called on St. Brendan, the navigator, to guide him well once they dropped out of hyperspace. The navigator, mundane, not saintly, Lieutenant Commander Lelia Nguyen, gave him a sidelong glance. She disliked it when the helmsman was nervous, but Lieutenant Costa wasn't arrogant enough to think himself one of the untouchable heroes, like Luke Feathertouch Jackson. He'd more than happily accept the aid of the saints and angels to keep his ship alive. Still, he put on a dashing grin and said to her, "Just asking for a swift victory. I know we'll win." She narrowed her eyes at her and didn't deign to answer. And when he felt Captain Way's eyes boring a hole in the back of his skull, he remembered why. Instead, he said, "Dropping into real space in 30 seconds. "I said this already, but I'll say it again," the captain said to both her bridge crew and the entire ship. "This is a formation action. We don't know whether the enemy is going to be polite and not run hyperspace interdiction for an entire system. But enemies tend to be uncooperative like that. I realize that it looks like the only gravity shadows in hyperspace are from planets in the star, but enemies can be sneaky and tricksome. Therefore, we will be dropping into real space at the edge of the system. We're going to keep formation and make in-system jumps as the situation allows until the enemy naval elements are completely destroyed. Maintain friendly fire awareness, maintain munitions countability, and let's not sail into our own shells like the Montezuma." "Aye, ma'am," the bridge crew, and probably the entire ship, replied. "We remember the Among the Star Tides we sing. If the enemy has forgotten her, let's teach them what happens when you touch our boats." "All the we sing," Lieutenant Costa howled with the rest, his fangs bared and his hackles raised. But he added, "And for the honor guard." "Let's not forget them," Lieutenant Way agreed. "They were R&I, our ship rats, blood for blood, a sea for every drop." "Aye, ma'am," the bridge roared. The ship lurched as it dropped into real space, and the speed of light was suddenly the speed limit again. Lieutenant Junior Grade Ingrid Jensen said, "They're not running any interdiction at all. What polite enemies." Lieutenant Commander Sofia Petrova looked over the data Lieutenant Jensen had sent her, while Lieutenant Commander Nguyen did the same. They sent each other preliminary calculations, made adjustments either for hyperspace exit points or planned firing vectors, and sent the orders to Lieutenant Costa. He loaded the in-system jump and prepared to brake hard to port and nose down. These crazy women were why he needed all the saints and angels. He punched it, and less than a second of hyperspace later, and he was executing the maneuver by wire. "Forward battery fire," Lieutenant Commander Petrova ordered, and the ship shook as 1, 3, 2, from a dozen turrets fired on a vessel very rudely firing plasma bolts into the battle screens of the Lepanto. And never mind that it didn't do any damage. The colors were distracting. In any case, the alleged battleship became so much orbital scrap about 3 seconds later. If the enemy knew what being rude rated for enemies, they'd quit being enemies right away. He made the Lepanto dance like a corvette. He made it twist and thread through debris and munitions by training, instinct, and what he believed to be divine intervention, all while Lieutenant Commander Petrova and Lieutenant Commander Nguyen fed him conflicting orders, and the data from Lieutenant Jensen fed alongside it. It wasn't strictly against regulations to start humming a tune as he sailed in seemingly defiance of physics, so nobody had corrected the habit. Soon enough, the words started coming out. There were 2 lofty ships from stellar England, they set sail. Blow high, blow low, and so sail we. It wasn't against regulation for the navigator to join in, so nobody had ever corrected her once she'd learned the words. Thus she joined in. One was the Prince of Luther, then the other the Prince of Wales, all a-cruising down the stars, a great Barbary. Lieutenant Costa deftly avoided a barrage from the Arizona, while simultaneously putting the aft Betty battery on vector to find firing solutions. That's when the rest of the bridge joined in. Aloft there, our bully bosun cried, blow high, blow low, and so sail we. Look ahead, look stern, look spineward and alee, all a-cruising down the stars of a great Barbary. The song barely noticed Lieutenant Jensen's interruption of fighters. Lieutenant Costa put the aft main battery and all of the point defenses on port side towards the fighters, as well as put the Lepanto on vector to kill another of the enemy big ships as the song continued. But there's a lofty ship to spineward, and she is sailing fast and free, all a-cruising down the stars, a great Barbary. Hail her, oh hail her, our gallant captain cried, blow high, blow low, and so sail we. Are you a man of war or a privateer, cried he, all a-cruising down the stars of great Barbary. Status change, they're going to concentrate fire. Lieutenant Costa didn't think. His hands moved. He put the ship in a spin, port over starboard, to spread the fire over as much of the battle screens as possible, and pitch upward to put the 4 main and Betty batteries in good position to teach the Xenos why kinetic munitions were superior to directed energy weapons. All by training, and instinct, all while the song rang through the deck. "Oh, no, I'm not a man of war, not a privateer," cried he. "Blow high, blow low, and so sail we. But I am a salt sea pirate, all a-looking for me, all a-cruising down the stars, a great Barbary. For broadside, a long time we lay, blow high, blow low, and so sail we." The gunners of the Lepanto put their munitions through one of the offending ships, and managed to take out a few of the smaller ones behind it. The Wales took out another, while the Waterloo demolished the last. Still, the song went on, till at last Prince Luther shot the pirate engine away, all a-cruising down the stars of great Barbary. "O quarter, those pirates did cry, blow high, blow low, and so sail we." But the quarter that we gave them was to sink him to the void, all a-cruising down the stars of great Barbary. On Coalition Defense Station, Ritterman Singh found something viscerally satisfying about making the figurative literal, which was why he was currently pounding his head against the wall in the office that he was obliged to occupy. Everyone knew what the committee was going to decide, but the other committee members pretended otherwise, especially when he suggested that they just do a simple thing. But no, the CIP Committee on Coalition Defense had just to pretend that they would, for the first time ever, form a unified fleet. This was obviously completely impossible. There wasn't a single representative who didn't think their planet or cluster ought to be the government in charge of said fleet, and provide all of the senior staff officers, while the rest of the coalition would provide the ship's captains, ship's officers, and enlisted men to do the actual fighting. Except himself, of course. He was the only rep who didn't put his own planet forward for leadership, and he had strong suspicion that over half the reps who did were only pretending to want their governments in charge. So he pounded his head against the wall, literally and figuratively, to bring his body and soul into alignment, or something. Maybe he was just frustrated beyond sanity, and couldn't help himself any other way than to make the mental pain physical. This was very likely incredibly unhealthy of him, but all of the people who cared were fighting their own losing battles to hold on to his sanity. Someone who might care, Jayan, the representative from the Kaya conglomeration, entered to see him in the midst of playing out a decent rhythm with his forehead. "Please explain," the woman demanded curtly as she lashed her tail against the floor. "I am manifesting the reality of the negations physically. It is poetry." "You are banging your head against the wall." "Yes," the Hertman answered simply. "Please stop. Unlike you, I've gone around the problem. The true kingdom of Orange is willing to go along with your proposal. So is New Saskatchewan and Saskatchewan. And of course, me. This will get the ball to roll downhill. And if I propose that we simply fold our fleets into the republics as auxiliaries, you won't leave me out to dry." "I'll inform the others of what I have learned," she answered. "Which is?" "The Republic has invaded the dominion of Exarch. If we continue to dither, they will find victory, and we shall appear to have shirked our duties. Even Pacifier has sent out their response before us. Aid workers and construction crews, sure, but it is more than we manage while bickering over who is in charge." The Ritterman turned a suspicious eye to his counterpart and asked, "What's changed?" "I get my information from my government. Kia Corporation does not wish to be embarrassed by inaction." The Ritterman didn't know whether to be grateful or furious. "All that bickering, and how much of it is for show?" "Can you ask any cipher to admit the Republic is better at anything than expect agreement?" "It was inevitable, and you know it. We pretend while we can that it is otherwise." Upon the bridge of the Exarch battleship, Priestmaster Naram Hamarav could not believe his eyes. He had believed that he had faced a vengeful Goddess Republic's most fearsome battleships and survived. He had been wrong. Besides these 100 behemoths that he had thought were main battleships looked like what they are, escorts and rapid response ships. "Do not steal the ship," he ordered. "Keep the shielding at fullest of power at all times." "We obey, Priestmaster," an imitate highborn replied. Priestmaster Naram Hamarav stared at the readout of the battlefield. Their Republican behemoths moved like the dreaded flesh swords of Zari, yet they were far larger than their prey, unlike the fish he compared them to. He shuddered at the thought. He could see sweat beading on the back of his helmsman's neck, and his sensor operator looked pale. They knew that they were going to die. Well, if they were going to die, why not? Initiates, by my power of the priesthood and majesty of the fleets, I do hereby raise you to acolyte lords, all of you. Then he triggered the ship-wide intercom and repeated himself before adding, all serfs are hereby raised to initiate highborn. We struggle against the very war-runner of the vengeful goddess republic, and such demands we show our worth. I have every confidence that you shall rise to meet the challenge. Do not look away. The ship lurched and its alloys groaned in protest as it suddenly altered course in a turn far tighter than was recommended. The helmsman did not relax when the maneuver was completed, however. He instead forced the ship to turn just as tightly in a corkscrew maneuver in the other direction. Then they were hit once, twice, thrice, and the shields were down. Then a full shot tore through the ship and called out its main reactor. They were disabled. If they could get to the bulkheads leading to the vacuum-exposed areas quickly, they might become The ship which had disabled his was firing again. He hoped that he and his crew had shown sufficient worth before Xur, such that their souls were not devoured. On the surface of Saxar, Juvenile 09321348 looked up at the pretty lights in the sky. The elders at the Raising Palace did say that the lights were the glorious warriors of the Exarch Dominion doing battle against the evil sons of the vengeful goddess Republic. But Juvenile 90321348 just thought that they were pretty. She knew that she wasn't going to be a warrior or a concubine to those standing above the initiate highborn, so she didn't trouble herself with things that such people were troubled with. She would make the abodes of a priest master the prettiest place on the whole planet, and the priestess would pat her on the head and praise her labors for their beauty. She just knew it. The pretty lights started to look like shooting stars. One of the shooting stars was getting terribly bright. Juvenile 09321348 didn't know anything at all after it was too bright to see. End of chapter. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Casper Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.